Hey guys, Dylan from the Geek Duo here, and today I'll be bringing you my RWBY Volume 8 Chapter 10 breakdown. Now, before we get started, I have to admit that I have been in the wrong. Up until this point, I've been insisting that Ironwood, despite shooting a child and despite killing a councilman, was still one of the good guys, and that he just needed to be snapped out of his semblance for everything to be okay again. But with what happens in this episode, specifically at the end of it, he's not a good guy anymore, and people are beginning to see that. Me included, so I'm just putting this at the start to say I was wrong. Anyway, the episode begins with Ironwood standing in his office looking out over the battlefield while soldiers inform him about Watts' escape with Cinder. Well, actually the episode starts with a photosensitivity warning, which we've never actually seen in RWBY, but then again, we've never actually seen what it's in reference to in RWBY either, but yeah. It cuts to the two soldiers who had the unfortunate luck of being the ones that had to report this to Ironwood, and they honestly look like they're shitting themselves just from being in his presence. I almost made a comment in my reaction about why is the door still broken, but then I remembered that it's been a day and a half max since the RWBY versus the Aesops fight, and most of that has been conducting war efforts, so there's not really time to get a contractor in to fix a door when your country's at war. Anyway, the female soldier tries to reassure Ironwood that while they may have lost Watts, they still have Jacques Schnee. But Ironwood quickly shuts that down and asks, what about Crow and Robin? The female tells him that, well, they have been able to evade capture up until now. Soldiers have been monitoring every exit, so they must still be inside the facility. While she's saying this, we get to see what's happening in the cell blocks, which is 4 soldiers are picking through the rubble to try and find the prisoners. One soldier picks up a chunk of the wall that blew in and finds a bird underneath before getting tackled by it. Well, another soldier is picking up the slab of roof that Robin was under. Upon my second rewatching of the episode, I saw that you actually see Crow transform as he's launching himself, and we don't actually get to see the morphing. It's just like there's a bird on the floor, then all of a sudden behind a slab that's maybe knee high, a man just springs out of it. So yeah, in my reaction I just thought the man got tackled by a bird and thought it was going off some Ant-Man physics, but anyway. Also, there's an animation error in this scene, because if you look under the soldier in front's arm beside his body, you can actually see Crow, and that model is actually frozen there for a few seconds. So the guard that found Robin points his gun at her and begins to tell her that she's being taken elsewhere, while in the background Crow performs a silent takedown on one of the other 2 guards and then runs over to punch the guard talking to Robin. It cuts back to Ironwood as he slams his new hand on his desk. which is the shot from the mid-season trailer, and he orders the two guards to go, and not to return until they have Crow and Robin. As they run back into the hallway, Ironwood resumes his previous position at the window, though this time he has his fingers clenched in anger at his side. Both his hands are like that, and they're shaking from anger, before he calms himself down. He touches the earpiece to ask the status of something. Most likely it's the bomb, whether it's been delivered, but he's interrupted by the sky flashing as a beam of light shoots out of Monstra before being followed by a massive explosion. We get a quick montage of the explosion from several perspectives, the first being the blinding light just washing all of the color out of Ironwood's office from the outside. The next we see the scene from the trailer of the Aesops carrying the bomb and charging towards the whale, before being blown back by the explosion, Vine and Harriet seemingly getting the worst of it, which is ironic because they're the two that don't get injured by it. We then see Weiss bringing Nora some food before dropping it in slow motion as the explosion lights up her room. And finally, we see some lances flying through Atlas, getting either disintegrated or knocked back by the shockwave. It's hard to tell because the explosion sort of consumes everything in white, so you can't actually really see whether something's being destroyed or just consumed. When the scene returns from white, we're back at Monstra, and we can see that there has been a massive chunk that is being blown away by the wind. So it's disintegrated, and the rest of Monstra is slowly disintegrating over time. We then get this little shot of Neo skipping through the whale's bones with the lamp in hand, before we transition over to where the Aesops were. Winter is the first to recover, hyperventilating a little as she asks the others if they're okay, to which Vine says he has no injuries. Elm shouts, "What?" as she's knocking on her ear, and Harriet doesn't respond. Marrow, however, does respond, but not to Winter's question, as he's more focused on the fact that they were still inside, as he runs up the wall of the explosion crater and looks at the carnage that remains. He looks like he blinks back tears before hanging his head in mourning as Winter joins him up on the wall. But before she can say or do anything to comfort him, she gets a call from Ironwood congratulating them on destroying the whale and calling them back to the academy. While he's saying this, we do actually get a shot of Vine attempting to comfort Elm, which she angrily pulls her shoulder away from him, which means that Elm is upset at what happened. She won't admit it, and she won't accept someone's comfort, but the way in which she reacted to that means she was affected by the death of the kids as well. So maybe there is hope for Elm. Mine's still up in the air though. Mara is confused by the praise because, well, they weren't the ones that destroyed it, but Winter tells him that they'll just say to Ironwood, it wasn't us, when they get to the academy. We then cut to a rooftop in Atlas as Watts and Cinder are looking at what used to be Monstra and trying to contact their allies, but they've gotten no responses, which makes sense. Well, Cinder and Watts wouldn't know this, but Tyrion and Mercury, they flew away while Cinder was trying to invade the prison, so that explains why they're not there. Salem's been eviscerated. Hazel is presumed dead. And Emerald and Neo, well, they've defected. Well, Neo hasn't defected. She's doing her own thing, but yeah. Also, I don't even think Cinder called Emerald, because Emerald would have picked up. Unless her scroll was on the whale, but who knows. Watts comments that Salem will be back soon, and until then, they need a plan. But Cinder is confused because she has a plan. She was given one, and that's for Watts to bring Penny to her so she can steal the maiden powers. She reminds Watts that he said in his message that he had control over Penny, but he corrects her by saying, "No, I said I had her under control. I implanted a virus in her. I don't have telepathic control that's able to bring her to me. I've sent her to the vault to open it, and then set her to self-terminate." This self-terminate comment angers Cinder because, well, if Penny's dead, and Watts didn't code in for the fact that Penny has to think of Cinder as she dies, Cinder's not going to get the power. And so she angrily shoots out her grim arm to grab him and starts having a go at him. But Watts replies with, "How have you not figured out by now? I don't work for you." Cinder responds to this by shoving him backwards so that only the balls of his feet are on the edge of the roof. And she takes a very Azula-like role in this next part of the scene, because when Watts reminds her that Salem sent her to bring him back, Cinder responds by saying that we need a new plan, and I've made one that involves watching you plummet off this roof, and then me heading to the vault and waiting for Penny to tear her limb from limb. She shoves him further off the roof, so now that he's just dangling by her arm. Initially he's got his hands grabbing it, but he lets go of it. And she's got a smile on her face because she's getting rid of the one annoyance she still has left in Salem's faction, and she knows where the maiden's going to be. But this smile drops when Watts starts laughing. Now, before I continue, I want to clarify which scene with Azula I was reminded of with Cinder in this scene. This is the Azula scene from book 2 where it's just a teenage girl commanding a seasoned ship captain to ignore the tides because, well, they wouldn't hesitate to kill him. She's still thinking it over, meaning that either the ship goes down and you're killed, you do this and it succeeds and I don't kill you, or you ignore me and you die. That's basically the scene that it reminds me, because that's meant to be an intimidation scene, but no, it's a petulant little girl ordering someone to do it her way, even though that's the wrong way. And I think that goes perfectly with the next part of the scene, because it's Watts calling Cinder out on trying the exact same plan that has failed over and over again. he reminds her that you stormed into Freya's room and you failed. You were taken out by Ironwood's war machine and Winter. You weren't even up against the Maiden then. You changed the plan at Haven to get all your enemies in one place, and then you got bodied by Raven and almost died. If only there was someone who could have warned you about that. Oh wait, I did. He then goes on to say, just because you've suffered your whole life, you aren't owed anything. You don't need just strength, you need to be smart as well. You don't have to be deserving of power, you have to be worthy of it. And that all Cinder hasn't been smart, she hasn't been worthy, all she's been is a bloody migraine. I didn't do the scene justice with my rendition of it, but yeah. This call out causes Cinder to angrily yell, and at one point she actually activates a maiden circle of fire, but because her arm is stretched out so far, Watts is outside of it. But yeah, she angrily yells and then pulls Watts back onto the roof before killing the maiden powers and looking off into the distance for a few seconds, and then turning around and walking to another edge of the roof, sitting down and letting a tear fall. Which, honestly, this surprises Watts for several reasons. One, he expected Cinder to still drop him. Two, Cinder let her guard down in front of him with the broken face she shows as she's staring off into the distance. And three, Cinder's crying. And well, I said this in my reaction, but that is exactly what Cinder needed to hear. She needed someone to call her out on her failures without torturing her and tell her that there are other ways you can do this. And while Watts may not be Cinder's biggest fan, he is the perfect person to turn her into a better villain. Which, I don't mean better as in she was one-dimensional, I mean better as in a more intimidating villain. We jump back to Monster's corpse, and we see that Mantle Team, they survived the explosion without any injuries, though John is using what little aura he has to heal a few of Oscar's Hazel-inflicted injuries. This is clarification that I was wrong in the last breakdown, because I'm pretty sure I said when he gets slammed into the wall, Jean's aura breaks. It doesn't. Yang gets a call from a concerned looking Blake, who asks them where they are and if they're okay, because, well, they didn't know that the kids were on the whale. In fact, they didn't know they were up in Mantle at all. They didn't know they were up in Atlas at all. Jean walks over to Yang's side and tells them that they're okay, and then asks the same questions of Blake, who says that they're alive, and then calls over White and Ruby. The camera moves over to Oscar as he asks Ren what they should do with Emerald, who is sat in the ashes of Monstra with the realization of Hazel's death hitting her. Though I am going to again do the obligatory no body, no death comment, though how he would have survived and where he's gone, I have no idea, and it's very unlikely. Weiss sends through a map for alloys. I'm indicating over here, but my editing software isn't working with text. It's ALOYS, which is Arc, Lie, Oscar, Yang, Sustrai? I don't know how to pronounce her last name. Anyway, she sends a map for them to follow that would take them from the fields that they're in, through the subway and to the Schnee Manor. It then jumps forward to them inside the subway as Yang is in disbelief about Oscar's idea to work with Emerald, and Oscar reasons that since they're all enemies of Salem, it makes sense. Emerald agrees with Yang, saying that I don't particularly like you, you don't like me, we should just go our separate ways. But Jean points his sword at her, saying she's not going anywhere. Though Ren says that they should consider accepting her help if Yang reminds everyone that Emerald's a part of the reason why she now has a robotic arm, and that she can't forgive her for that, or the role that Emerald played in the fall of Beacon. While she's saying this, we get to see what Emerald's petal color is currently. They're purple, and I guess this throws the petal colors are based off of the standard emotional theory out the window, because Emerald certainly isn't feeling powerful, ambitious, or extravagant at the moment. So I think purple might be embarrassment, remorse, or annoyance. Oscar says that while Yang's feelings are valid, and that she doesn't need to forgive Emerald, they could try giving her a second chance, as they've already been helped a lot today by someone they don't particularly trust. Ren immediately picks up that Oscar is referring to Ozpin, and when Oscar doesn't deny it, Ren says that he had a feeling that was the case. Yang and John are surprised that Oz is back and Oscar didn't tell them, but Oscar quickly informs them of how Oz saved his life and took some of the beatings so that he wouldn't have to. He also then goes on to explain that the explosion he created is lifetimes worth of kinetic energy that had been stored within Ozpin's cane, and that he used most of what was in there to create an explosion that big. This is also what he probably used to blow the hole in the bottom of Atlas at the end of last volume, because remember he did click the cane and it glowed like it did on the whale. And it also means that Oscar has been walking around Remnant with what is effectively a nuke in his back pocket. He tells them that Ozpin trusted his decision of when and how to use the power, so he wants to accept his help and return some of the trust, regardless of the things that they need to sort out. There isn't any more of this conversation though, because the kids suddenly hear a baby crying from further down the tunnel. So they all run towards the sound and come out in one of Atlas's subway stations. We actually get to see Yang push Emerald along to make sure that she stays with them as they're running. As they're walking along the tracks between the platforms, they take in the sights of all the people surrounding them, all the civilians, the students, the young children, and they make a point to show Emerald as the one to take the most interest in the crying kids, who are presumably either separated from their parents or orphaned now, and she probably sees herself in them. As they continue through the tunnel at the other end of the platforms, Oscar noticed Emerald's reaction to the kids, and he tries to give her a few words of comfort, telling her that he's seen what she can do, and they could really use someone like her in the coming fight. We then jump back to Ironwood in his office as he's standing at his terminal in the center of his office, looking at the 4 screens that pop up. The 2 that we can see in this first part of the scene are an indicator of the parts of Atlas that are currently being invaded by the Flying Grim, and a visual representation of the troops that are still alive and dead. So I'm assuming that the ones that still are marked as white and the ones that still have vitals next to them, they're the ones that are alive, while the ones that are blacked out are the ones that are dead. He's startled by the arrival of the Aesops, and he starts congratulating them again on blowing up Monster, but Winter quickly tells him that wasn't them. They've still got the bomb. He starts to ask who blew up the whale then, but he seems to come to a realization, though he doesn't elaborate on it, as he instead continues his circling of the terminal, showing us that the other 2 screens hold a online news article about what's happening in Atlas right now, and the other is a criminal profile for Cinder. And he mutters that having the bomb could still be useful. He turns to inform the Aesops that Penny still hasn't come to the vault, though he doesn't know if that's because Watts is incompetent or if he betrayed them because all of the prisoners have escaped. Hearing that Crow has escaped makes Harriet the most pissed we've seen her, at least in a while, as her semblance starts sparking and she turns a foot to run off, but Ironwood stops her. He continues his speech, saying that Salem hasn't been stopped and will shortly return to continue her assault, and that the Winter Maiden is the only way Atlas can survive. He pauses to compose himself and push his hair back in place, before telling Winter to bring Ark, Ren and Xiao Long to him, saying that he's going to leverage their lives in exchange for Penny's cooperation. And he says that he should have thought of this while he had Crow. He puts a hand on Winter's shoulder, and she looks up at him with fear, but before she can think of a lie to tell him, Harriet informs Ironwood that Winter let the kids run off into the whale, and they didn't return. Now, when I was reacting to this scene, I genuinely thought that Ironwood would take the hand that was on Winter's shoulder and then just suddenly start choking her with it. But instead, he just lifts it off her shoulder, turns and walks back to his terminal, and then slams both his fists down into it, cracking it in half and saying that was their last chance and now they have nothing. As he's trying to calm himself down, he gets a call from one of his commanders, informing him that non-military ships are being picked up on radar, that it's SDC ships that are heading down towards Mantle, which gives Ironwood an idea. He assumes that it was Weiss who sent the ships, and realizes that this is just another attempt from the kids to save Mantle. So he sits down in his chair, with an evil smile, he opens up his windows and announces that he needs to make a call. The scene cuts to Watts on the rooftop, fixing his tie and walking over to where Cinder is sitting. Now, it almost looks, at 2 points in this scene, that the person that Ironwood is calling is one of them, because it starts, well, for one, he says he needs to make a call, and then it cuts straight to Watts, who has his hand here, could be reaching for an inside pocket in his jacket. And then the second time is Cinder's phone starts chiming just as Watts gets to her. I also want to comment on the fact that maybe Watts was going over to have a more civilized talk with Cinder after seeing her break down like that, but we'll never know because, well, the messages come through. Messages from a certain ice cream lady who says that your boss won't stay dead forever, but you will without this. She sends a picture of her holding the lamp. She says that if you want to know her name, you know what you owe me. And she was going to send through another message, but we don't actually get to see what it is before the scene cuts away. I reckon that the final message is either a meeting place, or it's Neo demanding RWBY, well, being taken to RWBY, though I think this may be a ploy from Neo to get Cinder to activate Jin, or maybe RWBY to activate Jin, and then sniping the question from Cinder, asking about Roman. Also, Neo's profile pic on Cinder's scroll looks like someone who didn't actually give permission for their photo to be taken, because she actually has a hand up between the camera and her face, which is really funny if you think that about it, because one, Cinder actually has contact photos, and two, she just randomly pulled her camera out to take a photo of Neo. This rooftop scene cuts away to the Schnee Manor as RWBY, Weiss and Blake open the doors to greet their friends. We get some touching reunions in this scene, most of them by Yang, and they're accompanied by a new song. We get RWBY jumping into Yang's arm and being spun around, while Yang says that she missed RWBY too, and RWBY has tears running down her face. We get Yang and Weiss sharing a hug, while RWBY greets Ren and John in the background. And then we see Blake standing awkwardly in the back, doing the hand on her other arm that she does whenever she's whenever she's feeling awkward in a situation. And she actually drops her ears down to her head and then casts her eyes to the side and down, and only lifts them back up when Yang tenderly puts a hand on her cheek and then moves her face to look at her. As they're looking at each other, Yang blushes and they smile at each other before moving in for a forehead touch, which I have been informed is a very sapphic coded thing, the forehead touch, which is basically another soft confirmation that Bumblebee is a thing. Also, I ad-libbed that Blake and Yang scene because writing it felt like I was back writing fanfiction, so I decided to spring it naturally and not cringily. Anyway, Jean and Ren enter the foyer, looking for and then asking about Nora, which Weiss then walks over to them, either intending to lead them to Nora or tell them what happened. But we don't see this because at the same time, Ruby notices that Oscar is in the doorway now, and she makes her way over to hug him, but before they can, she spots Emerald behind him, and poor Oscar is left standing there as the only one who doesn't get a hug. Ruby quickly reaches behind her to grab Crescent Rose, while Emerald slowly reaches for her own weapon, which is the second time when encountering one of these kids that she's reactively reached for her weapons in response to them reaching for theirs inside of her. The first one was when Audrey had their weapons pointed at her on the whale, and she just slowly reaching for, like, I don't want to fight you, but if you attack me first, I will act in self-defense. Oscar quickly steps between them, notably with his back to Emerald and his hands pointed at Ruby, meaning that he's only focused on stopping Ruby in this moment, and he starts to say that he can vouch for Emerald, but they're interrupted by a call from May. She informs the kids that while the SDC ships have arrived, they're not alone, and we can actually hear people running and screaming in the background. She quickly orders everyone into the mines, and the call is cut short with the sound of an explosion. The kids stand around for a second in confusion before an alarm starts blaring from all of their scrolls. And I also want to quickly point out that Blake actually covers her cat ears when this alarm is going off, because, well, they'd be a lot more sensitive to loud noises than any of the human ears. Ruby then projects her scroll for everyone to see, and what is being shown is an emergency broadcast, one that has the SDC ships being blown out of the air by military ships before they land. It then cuts to Ironwood, standing alone in a spotlight, and he starts talking about how he has always promised to protect the kingdom. And as he's saying his speech, the camera moves through Ruby's scroll screen into the room that Ironwood is actually in. He tells the people that while their current enemy may be crippled, the protector of Mantle is still standing in the way of Atlas's salvation. He also then begins addressing Penny and the kids directly, saying that, I know how much Mantle means to you, so I'll give you a choice. Either you can come to Atlas Academy and do your duty, to which I'll leave Mantle to fend for itself, or you can watch me blow it up. I still have one bomb, and if you do anything that isn't what I've told you to, I will be blowing up Mantle. And he gives them 1 hour to respond. And I don't think he's meaning like an hour to shoot him a message saying, yeah, we'll be there. I'm pretty sure he means an hour to meet him at the vault. While he's talking, we get to see the reaction of several people. The first is Yang, Blake, and Ruby. Then we see Weiss. Then it's Cinder and Watts on the roof as they're watching it on the side of one building across the street. And then it's Ren and Jean, and then Nora, who's in Wise's room, and more notably, she's actually in her clothes now, which means she's well enough to be no longer bedridden. And as Ironwood gives his closing comment about 1 hour, she looks over at the still unconscious Penny. And then the episode ends. Now, I saw a post on my Instagram as I was nearing the end of typing out this script that said, even though Emerald said she wanted to go her own way in the subway, she was very obviously lying, because if she really wanted to leave, then she would have just used her semblance to make it look like she was still with the group, while she just casually walked the other way. We know she can now use her semblance on at least 3 people, though I don't know if Ren's lack of aura played any part of that, or if Ren's new semblance would be able to see that the emerald in front of them is an illusion because, well, it wouldn't really have emotions. Also, this semblance seems to be a passive one, and also seems to be active without aura, which sort of validates a video I was going to do after Volume 8 ends, discussing my thoughts on the differences between passive semblances and active semblances, so I'll still be making that video, but it seems to have been validated a little in this episode. Anyway, even if she can't use her semblance on 4 people, maybe the cap is 3. There is a point in the trip where Oscar turns his back to the group, so she wouldn't need to use it on him, and he also brings the attention of the other 3 away from Emerald and onto him. So she could have just, well, one, they're distracted, so their minds would be less attentive to the emerald in their peripherals, so it should probably actually be easier for her to affect them. And also, all Emerald does is just stand there listening to what Oscar's saying with her hands in the air. Like, she makes no move to leave. Anyway, that's all the information about the episode. I decided to put that at the end and not in the part of the episode it was in reference to, because, well, it wasn't my idea. I honestly don't know what to expect from the next 4 chapters. There's still 4 chapters left in this volume, and what is there to expect? We've got all the groups converging down in the vault. We've got maybe an episode of backstory from Jin. What else is there? But I do have a theory video that is being written at the point of this being published that should be out in the next couple of days, so there's something to look forward to. But with that being said, if you guys noticed anything in this episode that I didn't, if you've noticed that I have made a mistake in my interpretation of some of these scenes, or you want to discuss the differences between passive and active semblances, comment them down below, and I'll catch you in the next one.